Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Summer Sessions Live. So we're here this afternoon with a very special guest, David Pollard. So I would like to really welcome David to KWTB from all of us here. So David is going to dip in and talk about flipping your classroom and just share some of his experiences. So David, you're very, very welcome, and I would really like to thank you for giving up your time and coming in here and sharing your expertise with us.
No problem, Ashley. Thanks for having me. I feel like a bit of a traitor, to be honest, coming over to Kildare Wicklow because I'm on the border of Offaly, so, you know, mixed loyalties here.
That's brilliant. You're very welcome, David, and I can't wait to kind of pick up some tips and tricks. I always learn something when you present, so this should be good.
Perfect. So I'll get started, and thanks for having me. It's super to be here, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts on things as well. So we're going to talk about flipping your classroom. We're going to walk a little bit through just, you know, what that is, what does it mean, how do we do it, and some of the opportunities and the challenges that we may face as educators in the classroom. So from my side, I've worked within the National Learning Network, which is part of the Rehab Group. I've taught on QQI level 3 to level 5 programs within there. Some of them are rehabilitative training programs, others are vocational training programs, and now I work with them as an innovations project manager. So looking at new ways to bring in and integrate technologies for learning and teaching, and also looking at assistive technologies and strategies as well to support people who may have intellectual, sensory or physical disabilities as well. And apart from all that, I work with the National College of Ireland, which is where I met Ashley, and I'm a lecturer there in technology enhanced learning and all things technologies in learning as well. So we're going to get started, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get you to get involved. And Ashley, you can just let me know, because I've only got my one screen here because I'm in lockdown at home at the moment, but you might let me know if anyone has any trouble with this.
No problem, David.
Yeah, sorry, Ashley, go ahead.
No problem at all, and I will post the code in the Q&A as well.
Super, thank you very much. There's a small lag from my side to you, Ashley, so I might just give you a pause every now and again to see if you want to jump in, but that's perfect, thank you. And what I'm going to ask you to do, if you have an iPhone or one of the more upgraded smartphones, you can grab your camera and you can point it directly at that QR code that's on your screen, and on that camera it'll pop up a little notification for a website that is menti.com. And if you don't have your phone, or if your phone does not have that capability at the moment, what you can do is you can go on to your web browser, so open up a new tab and type in at the top menti.com, and the PIN code for anyone who does get onto the site is 166365. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go all the way over to Menti, and I'm going to show you what I'm asking you for. So I can see at the moment that we have had 4 responses already, and this is what the question is do you have a flipped classroom? And there's 3 answers to this. One is yes, one is no, and the other one is what's a flipped classroom. So it'll be interesting to see as we go through this some of the responses, to see who is practicing this as a method or a strategy, and others who are going, okay, well, this is something that is new to me and I'm curious about what it means and how I can use it within my space. So at the moment, it looks like we have about 8 people who are, you know, not so sure about what it is, and 3 people are using it. So that's going to be really interesting, and I think that's going to be a good way to tell where we go for the rest of this conversation. So that's super, and you can keep answering that as you move forward. So the code is there in the chat for anyone who's coming in late as well. You're going to go to www.menti.com and type in that code. So as we move on, we're going to touch on some of those areas, and you'll be glad to know, for those who are, you know, unsure about what exactly a flipped classroom is, we're going to use an example here really quickly that's outside of the education space within the classroom specifically. So the question that I have for you was, when was your last team meeting? So you're meeting with your staff if you're a manager, or with your colleagues as well if you're an instructor or a teacher within one of the spaces, and have a think about how that went. Now, for me, it was this week, and the first question that we were asked by the person facilitating that meeting was, have you read the minutes from the last meeting? Have you seen the updated agenda, and have you done the tasks that were assigned to you? Now, what was really interesting there was that it was online, so all of everybody's name, suddenly there was a mute sign beside everybody's name, and you could tell that they were going into their inboxes to try and find those minutes and that agenda as quickly as possible, so that they could come back and say, oh yes, I've read those. I was getting emails back and forth during it as well to try and make sure that everyone was up to speed. So that was really interesting, and I'm sure for you as well, you've got that experience at different times, even for yourself or for others within that meeting who are not quite up to speed. So the thing about this is that if we want to think about flipping our meetings, one of the things that we want to imagine is, we're at the very beginning of the session and everybody around the table is informed. So they've got all the information and everything they need to understand where they are. So that's where we want to start to think about. We want to start to think about, what would it look like if everybody was informed? So what they will look like if they're informed is that they'll understand the challenge that they're currently whatever that meeting is about. They'll understand the background of that meeting as well, so the history of that, and also be ready for idea creation and for discussion and for more practical approaches. So maybe getting involved in a project or whatever it might be. So it's not about content delivery because that's been done in advance. So the next stage within this is now, if we're imagining this perfect, ideal utopia, this scenario where we've got everybody in this meeting who knows what they're doing, we want to think backwards. We want to see, well, what do they need to get to that level of understanding? So that's the question that's always in our mind. And it'll be the same for when we're thinking about our learners or our students. What do they need to get to the level of understanding so that when they come into the classroom, that they'll be prepared to actually get to work on problem solving or a project or whatever it might be, or a discussion you want to have. So we need to make sure that even for a meeting perspective, if it's our colleagues, that we want to give them all the insight and all the information in advance. So we're trying to figure out what that looks like. So this is your screenshot that I prepared for you if you want to take it. If you want to go back to your managers and say, we want to flip our meetings, this is how you do it. So you'll talk all the way through this process, and then as well, the instruction of the facilitator of that meeting as well is key. So every single piece of communication that is before, during, and afterwards has to be very firm that, we're expecting you, we're putting the responsibility on you to look at that information, but we will provide it, but it's your responsibility to check that out. And that's something that's a crucial part of this flipped methodology, is that the responsibility for, I suppose, getting that content and understanding it and at least preparing in advance is given to the participants, whether they're in a meeting, which is our colleagues, or ourselves, or in terms of in the classroom, such as our students and our learners. So that's the meeting side. And now we want to look at it from a flipped classroom perspective. So this is what it looks like from our side. It's, I suppose, a basic introduction to what it is. But as we said, like our meeting, this is all about putting the content out and making it available at any time outside of the classroom. So this is saying, okay, well, I'm comfortable not, being the sage on the stage within our classroom environment anymore. We're going to say, I'm not going to deliver this content in the class because it's taken up, quite a lot of my time, and then we don't have the time to do the project work or the discussions, and that ends up happening, at home, which is, not ideal. So what we're doing is now we're given the content in advance. So that could be through videos, it could be through podcasts, get your newspapers, and we'll have a look at that in a little bit. So you may be using platforms like Moodle for that, or Microsoft Teams, depending on how you're doing it. But there's loads of opportunities to do that. So it's all about trying to understand, how do we take the content that we would normally deliver in class and now give it to students so they can check it out, whether it's on their phones or whatever, outside of the classroom. So this, I suppose, if we're just, I'm going to barely touch on the theorists, but we're looking at behaviorist theorists, and also we're looking at it from an individualist perspective as well. So the student will go back home, or they'll be in the coffee shop or wherever it is, and they'll be able to check that content out for themselves. Now, what's interesting as well is that actually this is starting to develop a little bit. So it's almost getting to a stage where students are now, that individual piece is starting to, I suppose, become a little bit blurred. And there is almost, I suppose, a social aspect to this as well, where students are communicating through WhatsApp or, TikTok or whatever around their homework as well, and about the work, the content that's there. So they're actually having some discussions, and you'll find it at different levels. So not all levels, but at different levels. Then finally is, what happens in the classroom? If we've given all the content, then what do we do when we get the students or the learners in with us? And part of this is all about creating activities, project-based pieces, problem-solving activities, whatever it might be, so that the students can now start to construct and build knowledge and understanding together as a group, or one-on-one with yourself within the learning environment as well. So now what we're doing is we're actually giving opportunity within the classroom to really get a little bit deeper into our, I suppose, our learning within there as well. So that is from a constructivist perspective, and that's our favorite Vygotsky there, if anyone wants to go and look that up. So Ashley, I don't know if you want to just jump in real quick there at any point, if you want to make any comments, or are you happy enough for me to keep going?
I'm 100% happy for you to keep going for now, David. If I think of anything, I'll pop in.
Are you sure you don't want to give us an insight into some theorists there?
I think my brain is fried at the moment. I don't think there's any theorists left in there.
Perfect. Neither do I, which is great. So in terms of the resources that we want to look at, and what I'm going to do is in a couple of minutes, I'll walk you through some of the opportunities, some of the tools that you can use online to help you to do this. But some of the simple things that you can look at are, for example, we understand that students may not have all the technologies required to, go on and use all of the educational technologies that we are interested in and we'd like to try out and we're looking at. And I'm sure that you've looked at different ones during the course of the last few weeks with Ashley. But you can, of course, have different options. So you can get them to look at their newspapers, you can get them to read a book, go into their libraries, or grab something if from an audiobook on their phone. For example, Audible is super for that because you get a free credit every month. Podcasts are great, movies, Netflix, YouTube, all of these things are resources that you can use to provide content outside of the classroom, so they can go and check it out. But of course, you want them to engage with that, and that's what we'll look at in a couple of seconds. So our next, I suppose, question that we have, and it's one that as educators we always want to try and think about, is like, why would we bother to do this? Like, why would we do it? Okay, I understand maybe how to do it. So we deliver content before, people come in and they work then on what they're informed, and they work on maybe the projects or the activities that help them engage with the content, and that's brilliant because well, why is it brilliant? And these are some of the areas that we can look at. So one is obviously that the content can be made available to students at any time, which means that, depending on, if they're working or perhaps maybe they have a disability or whatever it might be, they're able to go on and look at that content in a time that suits them prior to your class, which means that there's a little bit more flexibility in terms of that. So if they miss a class with you, they're not missing content, and that's something just to be aware of. Obviously, we'll look at the challenges a little bit later. In terms of if you're providing video content, people can pause and play. We've all gone on to things like LinkedIn Learning, Udemy, all of these courses, and even on YouTube, we can just stop a TED Talk at any stage and go, okay, well, that's enough for now, but I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. And for students as well, that's how they consume a lot of information in general. So we're starting to get to their perspective on this as well. Then the third piece is around prepared students. So questions that they might have about the content can be prepared at home. So that can be something that you can provide them as a kind of a little structure, is that here's the content. And now what I would like you to do before you come into the class is have 2 or 3 questions that are, or even one burning question that you have about this content that you want to ask me. And then that's what we're going to work on. And you can get that maybe in advance if you have an online platform like Microsoft Teams. And if you're starting to see the same questions coming through, well, you know, that's where I'm going to start to base my project piece around. And of course, then 4 is it frees up some time to work with students individually, because you're not having to deliver the content to everybody. And you'll know that people will be able to take different things at different stages. So if you're giving them activities, whether in pairs or in groups, you might be able to support then a student who maybe doesn't quite grasp the concept of whatever it is you're trying to teach in advance, and you're sitting down and working with them, and you can do that with the different groups, kind of pop around to them. So it almost becomes like a workshop environment within your classroom as opposed to a content. So one way to think about that is you're almost the guide on the side. So you're no more the sage on the stage, you know, the guide on the side, and you're working with them. And then we have this final piece, which I think is so crucial, and it's the ability to differentiate learning. And that's something that is really important. So you're starting to support your learners to get to a point where they can start to work through content themselves, and, you know, start to support people who perhaps need a little bit extra support, maybe at different points during that, for multiple different reasons, maybe personal, maybe you're getting different intakes at different times. So you've got a group who you know that, you know, are going to be a couple of months behind another group, whatever it might be, and you can start to support that as well. So that is some of our whys around this as well. And now we get to our how do we do this? Okay, so we've kind of looked at it, you know, from a helicopter view. We understand, you know, okay, we can understand giving content outside and then, you know, doing our workshops inside. But there's a few more little variables that you know we'll get that will come up. And the first thing that we look at is trying to get everybody on board. This is trying to, first of all, explain to managers as well, you know, why am I starting to change my way of doing things? You know, why am I not delivering content? If you know, a manager pops into your room and you're in a workshop environment, you know, where's the content? And you have to kind of get everyone on board at the start so that they understand, well, this is how we're doing it. We also have to, I suppose, really understand that for students, that transition between being used to coming into a classroom and getting the content and now being expected to look at that outside can be challenging, as we're all really aware of. And that's okay. For every group, it'll be a little bit different. And some groups, it'll work super well. You'll have people who are independent learners and you'll get them to that point and they will understand. But for other groups, it can be more challenging. So what you're going to do, I suppose, is to go back and to kind of think critically about your space, and you're going to go, well, actually, for this group, in this module, these are a couple of learning outcomes that, okay, I can start there. Here's one area in level 3 communications, and I'm going to start within this space here, and that's going to be my first experience, my first little, you know, sandbox experience of the flipped classroom. So it's not about going and trying to change everything all at once. It's about staging it, testing it out for yourself, going through, like Ashley mentioned last week, this inquiry cycle where you're using the flipped classroom methodology in the middle of this inquiry cycle, and you're trying to see, well, will this work in my environment? So then our next stage within that is our curation of resources. And this can be challenging. So this is for us to try and grab all of these resources and try and provide them then to our students in a way that makes sense to them, that's scaffolded, and that is useful as well and up to date. So one example that I'm going to use, and Ashley, you're going to have to forgive me for this, but your resources, you know, help me as an educator as well, is that you can use, there's all our different responses to our quiz there, is Wakelet. And Wakelet is one of the opportunities that you can have, one of the tools that you can use to curate content. So here, Ashley has used Wakelet and she has curated all of these educational technology tools. which include Wakelet. So she's provided some information, some resources there, and hopefully you can see it. Naturally, you can jump in if you can't see this. But then there's Flipgrid as well for student feedback, some video resources that are there. Within there, we've got assessment ideas and so on and so forth, book creators. So lots of different content there for educators who are looking to try and use tools in a technology enhanced learning perspective. So that's one area there. Number 3 is around classroom management. And one of the things that I would say to everybody, even if you're working online or if you're working, outside of you're in this environment and you're trying to flip your classroom, everything will stay pretty much the same, except that the responsibility for learning will go to your students. And so that's one of the biggest challenges and opportunities that you're going to face within this flipped classroom experience, is that some students will struggle to I suppose come up to speed with this way of thinking, and also you'll have others who will get involved and immerse themselves into this and will move ahead. So there will be these areas of time where you're trying to get people to a place where they're all comfortable within this. So that's something just to be aware of. Of course, then, providing technology training and supports like these webinars is so important, because you're getting an opportunity for yourself as an educator to get involved and to try out the new technologies that you may want to use as part of your toolkit for this. And I'm going to show you a couple of those in just a moment. Then we want to assign content, which we'll look at as well. So it's how do we use the technologies, and now how do we give it to the students, and how do we do that? So that could be through Microsoft Teams, could be through other platforms like Moodle, whatever it might be. But just making sure that students are aware and are very comfortable in saying, this is the content that I need to read and go through or see or view this week. And then in the classroom, we're going to talk about that. So then we have student work and application of skills in the class. That's up to you to be, providing activities that are starting to stimulate the students and work on them through the content. So like, okay, we've got the content now, what do we do with it? And then again, as we mentioned, it's all about independent learning. But one of the nice things about this methodology is that it opens up opportunities for peer tutoring. And within the National Learning Network, what we have is that we have a rolling intake for some of our RT programs. So we'll have a group of maybe 6 or 7 students who are a year in, and then the next year we'll have another 6 or 7 school leavers who are coming in as well. And potentially they're going to be, overlapping on a couple of their learning outcomes as they're moving forward. But what you can do is, with this model, as you're providing content outside, when people are coming into the classroom and you've got your students and learners there, they can actually start to be paired up together, so that somebody who's gone through that module or is almost at completion can support somebody who is maybe coming in for the first time and is working with them. And of course, then the fact that that person is teaching that student, there's I suppose supportive retention of learning and all kinds of things there as well. So that's getting to a point where that's when the process is in place and you're comfortable with it. You can add in those extra elements, which I think can be really, really beneficial. So now we're going to look at a couple of different tools and technologies. Ashley, I don't know if you want to jump in there before we get started, but I will just move across while I'm waiting for you to give me a green light.
100%, David, 100% to go. I just quickly want to kind of touch on what you were talking about there, just to reinforce, I suppose, where both of us are coming from when we're having this flipped classroom or blended learning model conversation, and I think that peer learning in particular is so valuable, but not just on a student level. It's very valuable on an educator and kind of teachers level as well. And I think all week people have heard me banging on about having a critical friend or, a colleague that you can call on to either for support, to take a look at something, or just to tell you that it's okay. It's really important to kind of build those professional relationships and networks both within kind of your centre, but it's also really positive to do that outside of your own kind of normal working environment as well. I know for me, it's good to get out of the echo chamber sometimes so that you can see what's going on, or you can pick up new ideas elsewhere. Just on that as well, kind of with the content or the learning materials, I just want to kind of go back to, I suppose, the value of quality over quantity. you know, to really encourage teachers to kind of ask themselves, you know, when they're looking at their content, is it relevant? Is everything that's on the slide or the page relevant? Does it add value, or is it a filler? And if it's a filler, take it out. If it adds value or it's relevant, keep it in. And that really is kind of, you know, all I have to kind of add to that.
So yeah, you can tell me at the end if I have any fillers in this, Ashley. That'll be a good, you know, starting point to any Q&A.
Thanks, David.
No problem. That's super. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you really quickly how you can use Microsoft Forms to create some content and a way to structure it that students engage with it, or at least, you know, try to get students to engage with it. I think it's all part of a journey or a process, and we've heard that so many times, but there are little tips and tricks that you can do rather than just giving the YouTube link and saying watch this. You can create a little bit of structure around that, which, you know, may help your students, and you can have a look at this and see if it works for you. So we're in Microsoft Forms. So this is in Office 365. It's on the browser, and you'll see that there's different quizzes that I put up, or different forms that I've put in there as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new quiz. And I'm going to just walk through this nice and hopefully slowly, just so that everyone can see what's going on. And I'll give it a little bit of time to get up to speed. But when I click on new quiz, which was on the left-hand side there, I'm going to be brought into a brand new quiz in Microsoft Teams. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say quiz, and we're going to say flipped classroom. So we're going to create a little flipped classroom quiz, and my little bit of instruction that I want to give is please watch the video. I'm going to say watch Jen's video because it's Jen's TED Talk. Watch Jen's video and answer questions. So we're doing this live as we're speaking, and then what I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to click Add New. Now we're going to get a few different options here in Add New, and we're going to click on Choice. So we're going to click down here on Choice, and it's going to pop up question 1. Now we're going to use question 1 as our, I suppose, primer. It's how we're going to deliver the content outside of our classroom to our students. So this is going to be flipping the content. So rather than playing the video in the classroom, now we're going to provide a way for them to engage with it outside of their classroom. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, please watch. Oh no, I'm going to actually ask a question. That'll be better. Have you watched this video? And sorry, I do talk to myself when I type, so you're going to have to forgive me for that. And then what we're going to do is on the right hand side, you're going to see a little portrait, and we're going to click on that, and it's going to give us an option to add images or videos, and we're going to click video. So now what will pop up is a URL, and this URL, as you know from different experience of copying and pasting, you know, one of the 101s of computers is that we're going to take, sorry, I've got to do that slower. I'm going to take from the top of our YouTube a URL. So that little bar along the top, and I'm going to come back into our Microsoft Forms, and I'm going to paste that in there. So now we've got our YouTube in there, and I'm going to click Add. And there we go. So our YouTube video is now within our Microsoft Forms, and I've asked, have you watched this? But I want to make sure that the students have watched it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in option 1 is yes. So that's what we have. And then option 2, I'm actually going to delete it completely. So we have only one answer there, and I'm going to make it required. Now in quizzes, we have an option to add points. So we can add, you know, any kind of points to our different answers or responses. You know, we can weight them, whatever you want to do. But in this case, we just wanted to leave points down in the bottom left blank. And next, so that's it there. So have you watched the video? We want to make sure that they've answered yes to that. We're going to add a new section. So we'll go to add and plus, and we're going to go to this little drop down menu, and we're going to click section. And we're going to say 3 questions on flipped classroom. So that's what we're going to have there, and we're going to say, please answer all. Now, within this, we're going to click add new again. And an example of what kind of question you might ask could be, and we'll go from the top of my head here, a rating scale. So we're going to do a rating scale. We're going to make it a numbered rating scale, so 1 to 5, I think is probably good from our perspective. And now we're going to add some points. So I'm going to say for this, we're going to have 10 points. And we're going to make it required again. And the question that we're going to ask is, how do you feel, Jen? No, I'm going to say, how much did Jen enjoy the flipped classroom experience? And any of you who are examiners or assessors, you can, give out to me about, how I phrased this question. But for this example, that's fine. Now, we can then give a little rating here. So 1 is really enjoyed, and so on, and ... And you can go all the way up to 5, or you can flip it around depending on what you want. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go all the way to the top right-hand corner, and we're going to click on settings, because this is important for us. So we want to show them the responses so that they can see. We want to make sure that people within our organization, if they've got emails for your organization, can do that, and you want to record your name and 1 response per person, or you can open it up if you just want to use it as assessment for learning or whatever you want to do. And then we're also going to make sure that you send a receipt to your respondents as well. Now, there are different options there. You can customize your thank you messages and so on and so forth. But that's really it. You can add more questions in, and then finally we're going to go up to our theme. We're going to change our theme at the top, and we're going to put in this nice fancy one here, and we're going to preview, so top right hand corner as well. And that brings us in, and that is our quiz pretty much done and dusted. And you can see now that for providing this content, you can share the link to this form to your students. You can see that now I have to say, have you watched this video? I can only click yes, and then I have to click next. So you're, I suppose, encouraging and nudging your students towards looking at the video. So rather than just giving it, you're giving them more chance for them to see it. And then you're brought into your questions about the video as well. And you can see that both in computer and in mobile, so you can get a sense of how your students might see this. So whether they're using computer or mobile, to make sure that it is appropriate and suitable for their user experience as well. Ashley, do you have any questions on that so far? I'm just aware that I've been talking loads.
Not at all, David. I really like how you did the gentle nudge there with the YouTube video in forms. That's a really clever kind of power of persuasion there that you've brought into that. I love it.
They still don't listen to me, but it's okay. You know, it's like at least we're trying as educators to get our students to listen to us. But yeah, no, it definitely helps. If you add some gates or some stages, it kind of saves the kind of easy out of, you know, just clicking on it and kind of leave it in the background. So yeah, it can help a little bit. So that's
100%. It's like that kind of, if you put in the box for no, you give them an option to opt out. So I really like that. That's really smart. Clever idea there. So far in the Q&A, you're doing such a really good comprehensive job. There's no questions. I do have kind of a comment in here. So I knew I could rely on Larry for some educational theory. So we have, I'm going to pronounce this wrong here, Bapton and dialogic theory, anyone? So I love that, and that's given me something to go look up myself later on. So I'm going to save that one for some bedtime reading. Thank you, Larry.
Cheers, Laurie. Do not expect me to answer that or to comment on that. So that's super. So what we're going to do is I'm going to move on to a couple of more just really simple tools and just look at them from a very, you know, introductory perspective. And then what we'll do is we'll go back in for one or two bits of information, and then we'll open it up to any questions that people have. So our next is ThingLink. And this is a super way, again, it's not just providing content. So for example, for this, if I knew who was coming into this in advance, what I could do is I could provide you with what you're seeing right now, which is in thinglink.com. And it is a poster. Now, what you'll see on this poster is that it's the flipped classroom, and it's a really nice, I've actually taken this from Robin Chandris Davis, because with all of these things, with educational technologies, is Make sure that you're using other resources that are out there. You do not have to create everything yourself. Make it easy on yourself, and I think that's the key to it. You do not have to strangle yourself trying to, make sure that you're creating all of the content brand new, fresh all the time. You can use these open bits of content too, which is really important. And people are willing to share, and vice versa. You'll start to be able to create some content that other people will then use. And you can think about how that might work within your center and how you could share some resources that may overlap into other modules that people have. So this is your flipped classroom, and I love this because it gives you this nice wave of what happens and where does it happen. So we've got out of the class, and then we've got in the class, and before the class, during and after. And you can see that the content happens before the class, and then we drop down into the class, and it's all about discussions and one-on-one interactions and all of these learning activities. And then after the class, we go back up and up into the wave, and we're outside of the classroom again. And of course, then it's the continual understanding of these in terms of, I suppose, if we're looking at Bloom's taxonomy, we're trying to get to the higher end of that. And I think that's really the key part of it, is that we're now taking away the kind of lower levels of that for the classroom piece, and we're trying to engage and get to that middle piece and then to the top of that as well as we move forward with this. And you're kind of looking at me going, well, okay, this is great, David, but it's just a poster. But actually what they've done is they've added in these little links, and you can see them there, that give us information on what they are. And by clicking on that, so I've gone there, I've clicked on one, and up pops this little information piece about what's happening at this point, or this perspective, and this point in the process, which is all about looking at it from a UDL perspective. Now I know that from chats with Ashley and from others, that UDL is a big part of where we're all going as educators as well. And it's just interesting to see the kind of in-depth pieces here. So you're giving, if, for example, for us, if we think of ourselves as the learners in this position, we're going on here, we're seeing this poster, we're like, okay, I understand the process, but now my interest is piqued. So I'm kind of looking at that, and I'm clicking on this, and I'm going, okay, well, what happens here? Brilliant. Okay, that's super. Now, what happens at this point? And of course, as well, you've got an opportunity to have immersive reader with this as well in Tingling, which is super for anybody who may have a visual impairment or may struggle with literacy as well. So you've got these options here at the right-hand side as well. So that's really what it is. It's about providing a way to engage and create content that's engaging. And for yourselves with Tingling, what you can do is you can get videos, or you can get pictures, and you can upload them to here. And then you can start to add in these little bits of information on your picture or whatever it might be to create this sense of interactivity for your students. So that's that. That's Tingling. So that can be, something that you can go and have a look at and see if it's useful for you. And I would just recommend, for a start, just going and searching there and seeing what's available already there that might work for you. Flipgrid, which I'm not going to go into, but I think that you may have touched on before, and that's really a way to get feedback from your students outside of the classroom as well. So it's not live, it's not synchronous, it's asynchronous. So it's a way that you can put up a topic in Flipgrid, and students can record themselves commenting and talking about that as well. So you're starting to add some more engagement. It's not just content delivery that's happening outside, but actually some of the discussion as well. Some of that, lower level discussion is starting to happen outside as well. And you're starting to, go deeper as you're bringing it into the classroom, and you can use those bits of feedback for that. So I'm just going to leave that there. You can have a look at that yourselves a little bit more in depth, and you may have already done that. So I don't want to overlap again. And finally, the last thing that I want to do, and I see that we're just about bang on time, which is super, is looking at Quizlet. Now, Quizlet, when you're brought in, is a way to have a look at, I'm going to show you super quickly, cards, flashcards. And I love this because we're talking about flipped classrooms, and we're going to flip some cards, so it all makes sense. And I'm not going to confirm my email address, and I'm going to accept the cookies because, why not? And this is a way to create flashcards that you can provide to students outside. Now, these are flashcards that can be printed off if you want, or you can make them available online. So with this, I've asked the question, what is a flipped classroom? And you can see down here the different terms, all the different bits. And I know that I've put in a pedagogical model in which the typical lecture and homework elements of a course are reversed. And so I've taken some of these responses, and now if I click on this, it flips over and I can see that. So as somebody who's interested in flipped classrooms, I can test myself to see, do I know what definition for this is? Now, another thing I might do is, what is a challenge of a flipped classroom? So that's my second card, and on the back, it relies on learner responsibility. But you can imagine you can do this for your work experience modules, for different terms. If you're doing maybe a computer module, whatever it might be, maybe it's a business one. And one that I really like is horticulture, where you're looking at the different plants, and you can have a picture here as well instead of a question, and you can see if your students know that. But that can be given not in your classroom, but outside, so they can revise and test themselves as they move forward. And quite simply, you're popping down here to add and remove terms, and I'm going to add a card, and I'm going to say test 2, and I'm going to say answer 2, and then I'm going to click done. And as simply as that, I have now added in an extra card that has ability to flip and learn. So there's some examples of some of the technologies that we've looked at. They're super brief, and I know they're kind of like, it's almost like little teasers for those, and we could, do a session on each one of those. But I think it's important to have a think about them and be aware that there are some of the tools, not just with your newspapers and stuff, that you can start to go, okay, well, how do I get to the next level of this content delivery for my students outside the classroom? And some of the challenges that you're going to face, this is where we're going to finish up on. This is me done and dusted after this, and I'm going to hand it over to yourselves, is that you need to start to consider, how you might get around some of the challenges. We mentioned some of the classroom management, we mentioned getting people on board. And one of the things that I found really useful is that if we use that inquiry cycle that Ashley used last week, and maybe it'd be good for anyone who maybe didn't get on to have a look at what that looks like. It's the DADDY model. So you're starting with your define piece. You're trying to understand your learners and their experience and their needs. But also, I think it's good to try and create some kind of instructor needs analysis as well, or some way to get some feedback. You can use whatever word you like within this to understand, the instructors within the group, the teachers within there as well, and their comfort with different technologies, because you may have to go, okay, we need to support to get to a point where we can really flip the classroom. We need to not only support our students, but we also need to support our instructors as well. And we need to support them in, I suppose, onboarding with different technologies, trying different things, and giving them space to just have a bit of fun and test things within a sandbox as well, so that we can get to a stage where we're comfortable ourselves with that. From my perspective, we do this from different perspectives. So one of the areas that we do it is from a technology enhanced learning perspective. So we may say, okay, well, we're going to try a new technology within the organization, but before we get to a point where we're, green lighting that and that's in our toolkit, we're going to look at it from the needs of our students and the needs of our instructors. And then once we've got a toolkit green lighted, we're going to map it to those needs. We're not going to use the technology first to drive what we're doing. We're actually going to use the needs first. That's going to drive what technologies we're going to use to be appropriate to those needs. And that's key. And you may find even within this strategy that it's going to be the same. You're going to look at the needs first, and then you're going to say yes or no, this strategy is appropriate or not as needs. So that's where I think we need to be at in terms of this. It's really exciting. It's something new for a lot of people, but it maybe not be appropriate for all cases. So that's just something that you'll have to do individually. And it's where, going back to Ashley's point, having somebody that you can talk to will be super. Having someone that you can pair up with and say, okay, well, you test this one out, I'll test this out, and let's give each other some feedback. Obviously being aware of, as Ashley said, the copyright areas and also GDPR can be important. So just have some discussions around that if you're using a technology or if you're downloading material, images. There's different websites that you can just get free for that, and maybe we'll share some of those resources afterwards. Actually, that might be useful for everybody. And finally is the digital citizenship, and this is where classroom management and outside the classroom, everything kind of comes all together. And what that means is that it's the safe, savvy, and ethical use of online tools or the internet. It's how we act, both as students, learners, and instructors online in an online environment, which can impact on what's happening in your virtual classrooms, but also, what's happening in the digital spaces. Like if you're sending students to websites, if you're looking at different things, how do they behave and interact? And that's something that we can start to I suppose integrate into all of this, not just with UDL and all that, but how do we behave as citizens in this digital space? And I think that's really important. So there's just some considerations, some challenges, and I'm not saying I have the answers to all of them, but I think discussions around those are really, really important, especially around the digital citizenship, where, you know, we're stepping into new worlds constantly, and almost we're kind of going back to our students' worlds because they're more, I suppose, immersed in them in a lot of cases than a lot of us. So that's something that we can learn from them. So maybe they can provide some value there. And finally, we're going to go back to menti.com, and I'm just going to ask you, while we're looking for some questions and answers, to give me some of your one opportunity that you might see from Flipped Classroom and one challenge that you might see from a Flipped Classroom as well. So I'm going to open that up. You can scan it with your phone if you're just joining us. It's the Menti that was open earlier. It's the same code, 166365. So Ashley, you might just pop that in the chat as well, please. That'd be super. And I'm going to open this up here for us, and we will move on to our next slide. So you may just need to refresh if you're popped on there now. And the question that I'm asking is, please share one opportunity and one challenge that a flipped classroom approach might bring to you and or your learners. So it's just one word, one challenge, one word, one opportunity. So you can pop those in as you wish, because I'm sure you have loads of thoughts on it. Now I'm going to stop talking. Ashley, I'm going to let you jump on there and we can wrap it up or take some questions and answers or whatever you want.
Thanks a million, David. That was really, really informative. And, you know, for me, it's just even about, you know, I suppose having those kind of conversations that are thought-provoking, essentially, you know, and I think that's what you did this morning there. You know, you certainly left me with a lot to think about. And sometimes it's just even having your own thoughts reframed. So that was really, really positive. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it.
No problem at all. Some interesting comments coming in there as well from people around the technology not being available, which I think is really a crucial one to us all, especially depending on, you know, the group that we're working with as well, and even in terms of physical space. You know, if somebody is in a certain part of the country, you know, or you know, they may not just have the technology available to them. So that's really interesting. Technical issues, of course, is a part, time management. And then we also have other things, which is around fun, interactive learning. We've got all kinds there. So I think that'll be interesting as we go through that to see what's popping up. So there we go. That's some interesting one, peer-to-peer learning, teacher skills. So yeah, I suppose what's interesting about the flipped classroom is the opportunities are also your challenges. In a lot of cases, that, you know, it's one of those things where independent learning of students is super. It's a great opportunity, but also one of the biggest challenges from our perspectives as educators. So yeah, I think that's going to be interesting to see as these questions and answers come in. So thanks very much for that. Thanks for having me, Ashley.
Thank you so much for joining us, David. You know, I know how busy you are because I follow and keep up to date with what you're doing, you know, so I really, really appreciate, and from all of us at KWE to be here, thank you for sharing your expertise with us. We really appreciate it. You know, I think the questions are quiet at the moment because I always find with these topics, there's a lot to process. And even for me, I think of questions that I want to ask the next day.
Well, look, I'll tell you, if anyone wants to follow up, maybe what I can do is we can get people to maybe hop online, or they can send me an email or whatever it is afterwards if they want to reach out to you first, and just maybe if they have any questions and they'd like to maybe just follow up on that, I'm more than happy to do that. And also, like, I mean, we use Twitter a lot as educators as well here in Ireland, so I would recommend people popping onto Twitter, and there's actually a Twitter chat tonight. So I might get you to just pop that into the chat, Ashley, if that's okay, the hashtag NT2TEU. And I think we have Holly Murray, who's from the up in Donegal, ETBs, who's going to be coming on to host it for us tonight, talking about accessibility. So that might be, you know, if people want to jump on Twitter and get involved in that conversation at 8:30 tonight, they're more than welcome, and we can, you know, maybe follow up and connect there on a personal level as well.
Absolutely, 100%, you know, and I would come in and second that as well, in the sense that I suppose one of the most valuable forms of professional development I've had over the last couple of years, a lot of them have been, you know, from kind of, I suppose, networking on Twitter or building relationships, or, you know, people are so generous particularly educators, with the content that they develop. And that's another place where you can look for that critical friend and build up those relationships. So I would second that. And Holly's chat tonight should be great. It's at 8 p.m. And again, the hashtag for that is New Teachers to Twitter EU, NT2TEU. So I'll pop that in the chat there. It's there. So I think there might be some questions coming in. Just lots of positive feedback. A brilliant presentation. Thanks, David. I love the theory background.
Oh, no problem at all. Look, I suppose we're all learning as well at the same time. Like, we can talk about it, but everyone's experience will be different, and we'll all be coming in from different aspects. Apologies, I can hear my dogs barking, so you're going to get the real experience of where I am. But yeah, I think like, I'm looking to learn from other people as well. I know you are, so having these conversations can be really useful,
So we have a comment in there, and I agree with it 100%. You don't necessarily need technology to do a flipped classroom. I used magic charts and ran successful flipped classrooms. Absolutely. It's about finding what works for you, I think. David, do you have any comments on that?
I got distracted by my dogs, so can you just tell me that one more time?
No problem at all. So just a comment in here that you don't need technology to do a flipped classroom. I used magic charts and ran successful flipped classrooms. I would 100% agree with that. You don't necessarily need to use technology to flip your classroom. Just for me, it makes it more fun and sometimes more efficient. But again, for me, it's about choosing the tools that give you an opportunity, say in, for example, Wakelet, you can also print off a PDF of your collection. So if a learner doesn't have access, it's just about thinking about the accessibility of the tool. Do you have any comments on that, David?
Yeah, no, I think that's actually, it's brilliant, and I'd love to know more about what that instructor is doing, or the teacher, and that'll be really interesting. And I agree 100%. You do not have to have the technologies. That's why we're trying to emphasize using newspapers and things like that to do it. I suppose we're in a digital space at the moment because we've been all thrown in there in the deep end, and I suppose that's where our minds are at the moment. But absolutely, it doesn't have to be technology driven or technology focused. If you can do without it, that's super. And I know that a lot of the students that I work with have mild to moderate intellectual disabilities, so the online space can be difficult for them to navigate. And because sometimes the user experience of some of the platforms is not designed in a way to support them to have the best and optimum experience. So absolutely, that's something that you need to look at. And that's why I always recommend going through that inquiry cycle, which can be a little bit slower to bring in a new technology and integrate it, but it will allow you to do it in a really reflective and critical manner, which allows the students to be put at the center of it. And sometimes you'll just find that a technology, it's wonderful and you're really excited about it, but it doesn't fit the need, and that's just a matter of saying, okay, well, I'm just going to park that, or maybe it'll work in a different context with a different group. But sometimes we have to take that as educators, and I would love to learn more about what they're doing, so 100% behind that.
Okay, we have a question there. Just from your experience, David, would you try this out first with a strong or weak group?
To be honest, it depends on what you want to achieve from the inquiry cycle, or from the process of trying it out. If it's something that you're comfortable with and you feel confident, you can do it with any group. So for example, we've done it with a rehabilitative training group, which would be going through level 3 QQI modules, but potentially not for certification. So their focus would be more around, the social skills and developing, and they did it. But again, like that person who mentioned in the comments said, you may take it away from the technology for a start, and you may build up their comfort in the space. So that's what I would recommend, is that get them used to the process before throwing in new technologies or anything like that, because the process is more important than the tools that you're going to use. The tools can be built up and you can build your toolkit, which is super. So that's one area that I would say if you're thinking about it from that perspective. But then also, if you have a group who are very competent with the use of technology and the use of different areas, or maybe they're well through a module and they're very comfortable and you have a good relationship with them, then I would say that's an opportunity for you to maybe push the boundaries a little bit with that, and get yourself a little bit uncomfortable by trying new stages as well with that. But I think always with the the inquiry cycle in mind, that you're defining a need and you're working your way through that. So it depends on yourself, but I would always, I don't know, there's pros and cons to both. Sometimes you have more space to play in some groups that maybe I suppose assessment is not always on their minds, because you have an opportunity to play around a little bit, whereas you might be more restricted in some other groups. So you can see there's pros and cons. So that is like a no answer to that question really, but maybe my thoughts might help them.
Thanks, David. A comment in there from Larry: textbooks were a very old form of this.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Another question there: how often would you use this method within blended learning, taking into account the focus on learner responsibility?
Yeah, I think I would see it as almost separate. It can have its overlaps, which is great, but I would try and keep blended and the flipped classroom, separate in your mind. So I suppose the blended learning is, I suppose, a one way to deliver, but that I suppose the flipped classroom is a strategy within your toolkit as an educator as well. So I see it slightly differently, and it's up to yourself. I've seen some instructors or some teachers who completely go flipped classroom with all the modules, all the stuff, and that's super. And then others who would just take bits and pieces. And I always recommend, especially if the blended model is new to you, is that you would pick 1 or 2 learning outcomes within one module with one group and just try it and see how it goes, and get the feedback from your students and your peers and from yourself, and think about it that way, and then start to build it out. And then you'll get a sense of where it fits. But again, there's no one size fits all, and you'll find that in some modules, in some cases, you'll end up going, wow, this just fits perfectly. This is brilliant. So for example, I know that in some of the apprenticeship models, in some of the I suppose educators that we've been working with to go through some of the inquiry cycles, they've gone, yeah, this is perfect, because they can just give all the content in advance and then focus on getting them hands-on with, if it's carpentry or whatever, in the actual workshop itself, which has been brilliant for them. Whereas in other courses, it may not work so well. So it's something just to be aware of. And I think your best bet is to go through that cycle, because it'll give you all of the information you need to answer the question for yourself.
Thank you, David. So our poster there came back in with just kind of a little bit of an explanation of what they were doing in their flipped classroom. So I'll just share it with you. So I put up various stages of online shopping on magic charts, put students into groups, and gave them 3-minute slots to brainstorm what they knew about each heading. And then we went around each chart and reviewed what everyone wrote. Each team had different coloured markers to write their comments. Then the flipped class was followed by a technology activity where they were then given an online website and specific questions about online shopping, which require them to do a deep dive on the online shopping experience.
That's super. So I suppose the question I have there is around, in that initial piece, were they working remotely just between themselves outside of the classroom? And like that's super. So I'm really curious about how that would look. So yeah, I might try and follow up on that if that's okay, Ashley. I'd have to get my interest going there.
Sparking that interest, I love it.
Thanks for sharing that. So appreciate it. That's super.
And I think that is it, David. So I think we have managed to wrap up on time as well. Awesome. So there's no more questions coming in there at the moment, apart from, really positive feedback, and thanks for sharing. So I really appreciate that. And again, on behalf of all of us here in KWETB, thank you so much for joining us this morning or this afternoon.
Pleasure.
Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to wrap this up. Just a reminder that the third session for today is at 2 p.m. and that's with our guest presenter from Ontario in Canada, Lynn Thomas, and she's going to walk us through her experience of building an accessible classroom. So if you're free this afternoon, please do pop on. Lynn's session is sure to be, another thought-provoking kind of chat through accessibility. So thanks again for your time. Thanks a million, David.
No problem at all, Ashley. Thanks so much.